Good afternoon, everybody. Could I get a show of hands of everybody who is here in the audience who has already given a presentation on this massive stage? I see lots, right? So I got to have a great opportunity to talk with our two participants in this fireside chat today. We have an advantage. We got to listen to the last several days of presentations, and so we got to change our strategy at the last minute. I tend to personally be a rule breaker, so I'm kind of excited about this. I hope that you are too. We really find that it's important not just to talk about the changes happening with the grid and the energy transition, but to talk about the people that are leading us forward. And so I'm going to ask the two distinguished gentlemen here today to introduce themselves. But as they introduce themselves, we want to find out a little bit about who they are. And so what, in addition to who you are and where you work and how you got there, what is it about your core values that, regardless of what changes are happening, your core values that are going to stay the same? So, Sunny, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for flipping the script. My heart rate was very low earlier on, but you tore the script, and now my heart rate is a little bit closer to what I will consider like super active right now. We had great plans to have a broad conversation on all things energy transition, and now you've sort of flipped the script on us. So I have to figure out how to tap dance a little bit. I lead strategy for Exelon, and in my role, I am responsible for essentially taking a long-term view, understanding the different variables in the future, and then trying to articulate all of that into a cohesive set of actions that we will pursue over time. Exelon obviously is a large T&D company where we have 10.7 million customers. We're in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic. In that role, I have to rely a lot on data. It means I have to make sure that we have data-driven decision-making. And for us to do that, we have to essentially be flexible enough to understand what the data tells us, but also be responsive enough to make some short-term and long-term decisions. I am basically trying to lay out what my values are. My values are logical thinking. You know, those are the things that drive me, being passionate about data, anchoring to the long term, being flexible enough to maneuver in the short term, but even more importantly, just understanding the circumstances around what your reactions need to be as you prepare for the long term. So hopefully that gives a little bit sense of who I am and what sort of drives me at what I do.
Thank you, Sunny. How about you, Pat?
Great, thanks, Sunny. Well, I'm at heart a rule follower, right? But I'm an eternal optimist too. So I think being here at the end gives us an opportunity to stand on the shoulders of everything that has gone before. And we didn't want to replow that same ground, so hopefully we can get to some new places. I've had a very rewarding career in the electric utility business. I was telling Sunny, I started my career at PICO, which is an Exelon company. I started in the nuclear power plant in Maryland and have worked in T&D. I'm an electrical engineer by training. Have worked in T&D, both design and operations, a lot of technology and leadership before joining ESRI a few years ago. Now, if you're not familiar with ESRI, most utilities in this country and many utilities around the world use our mapping software to map and manage their infrastructure. And what we are finding is that that is becoming increasingly more enterprise-wide and more mission critical in the way that they use that. Now, we all just did our taxes last month, and people are used to saying ESRI. My W-2 did not come from ESRI. It came from Environmental Systems Research Institute. So I essentially work for a very environmentally conscious research institute. And fun fact, ESRI puts about 1/3 of their gross revenue into research and development, which is 5 times more than most software companies. And everything we do is customer driven. So I would say in terms of my values, I'm very much of a servant leader mindset. So I agree with many of your things. I'm an engineer that aligns them. They have to understand how things work. I have to focus on the goal, but I want to get it right, and I want to do it in a way that is consistent with my internal compass. And so that's the way that I run that. Our goal is ultimately to help all of our customers do their job more effectively.
Thank you so much. So I am Vanessa Edmonds. I'm CEO and founder of the Utility 2030 Collaborative. I founded actually Utility 2030 in January when people were still trying to figure out if the coronavirus was beer from Mexico. Like literally, that was the conversation. So it was a really interesting time to be starting an organization like what we have. But what we do is we work on helping companies and in the utility industry work through solutions to challenges while at the same time leaning really into the human element of that, the leadership development and where they are in their leadership journey. So a core value for me, I'm a big believer in the 7% rule. And this might sound depressing to you, but there's good news at the end of it. So if you did something really, really bad, like horrible bad, 7% of the people that you think are your friends would stick by your side, and 93% would be like, I don't know you, don't make eye contact. And that sounds depressing, but it's actually not depressing. It means that there are 7% of the people who, regardless of what you do, believe in you. And at Utility 2030, that is our value, that when companies come alongside of us, you are in our 7%. You can fall on your face. I was walking actually to the cocktail reception last night, and I walked over one of those vents, and my skirt came up over my head. Your skirt come up, and Christina, Christina is my new best friend. She's the only person who saw it, and she's like, "You got this, girl. You just pulled a Maryland." I mean, we are those people and so that's our values. We will always lean into like the humanness of who all of us are. And so based on values, we're going to move to the next question. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
You don't know what to expect, right? Skirts flying overhead. So what are your current priorities? How have they changed, and how does this really reflect your leadership style?
I think we've heard a lot from the different panelists about where we are in our energy journey as a country, right? We're seeing massive, load growth or expected load growth. We're seeing a changing supply stack, and we're also seeing, whether we agree to it or not, like we're still seeing disruptive weather patterns. Climate change is still, we're still dealing with the physical effects of climate change. All of that means we need to be anchored on the long term. And for that, I think, how do you manage this long-term transition in a manner that drives your immediate short-term goals? In the Mid-Atlantic, this year we saw real high energy bill spikes as a result of just the nature of the energy market. So affordability became a real big challenge across some of our utilities. And to address that meant we just had to start thinking differently. What drives our decision making right now is basically understanding, like I keep saying, fact-based data. What can we do to address the challenge? For grid integration and grid optimization, it's mostly around the nature of investments that we need to make as we continue to try to bring new resources to the market, particularly new supply resources. For the customer side, it's basically understanding the value of the investments and the impact on their wallet. So those two things sort of like drive a lot of the discussions that we're having today in the near term. But I always overlay this long-term view that despite this huge increase in demand that we're seeing and the need to affordably provide new supply resources, we have to keep our eyes on the long-term ball, which is we need clean energy in the long term. And those factors all sort of wrap up into one. May not be the most pressing thing right now, the clean energy transition, but it's always been there at the background. Affordability and bringing new supply is probably the biggest factors right now, but the clean energy transition continues to dominate how we think about investments as well.
How about you, Pat?
Very good. Well, I'm coming at this from a little bit different point of view, right? My current priority is to support the utilities in this room and the utilities around the world that are dealing with these issues. And some of the things that I see is that they're dealing with a younger workforce and a workforce that is digitally native. And so those field workers find it very objectionable to fill out a card. Did we hear earlier today about customer service records going on a 3x5 card 5 years ago? They expect to do everything on their phone. They expect to be able to look at a map based on their current location. And so we're very responsive to that. I would say probably the biggest thing that we're responding to is the utilities need to roll out more sophisticated ADMS. And of course, ADMS needs a very detailed model of the system. And what we're finding, what utilities are finding, is that the mapping systems they have been using for the last 20 years are not detailed enough and not robust enough to support that. And we began a research effort about 12 years ago to develop those new models. And so we're seeing a lot of utilities transitioning their existing data into these new models, which are capable of supporting ADMS and advanced engineering and protection. You know, we've heard a lot about batteries, and I'm an engineer. If somebody said, Sonny, I'm going to give you a big battery, where would you put it, right? And how would you value it? It's actually not an easy question to answer. You might be tempted to say, well, we have space at substation XYZ,
Yeah.
but that might not be a good location, right? There are certain physical parameters, there's certain environmental and community parameters, but there's also cost evaluation about what that resource is going to look like as it charges and discharges over time. And so all of these questions are becoming increasingly more complex and more complicated. And so my role is to support our customers as they make that journey and try to spin up these systems that are capable of helping them answer those questions.
Yeah, but I really like what you said, because I think that that's the mindset. Like, you know, for us as a utility as well, you know, we have multiple customers that are on different energy journeys. For a typical resident, it might be just, you know, I want my bills affordable. But for some other customers, it might be, you know, we want to be connected to the grid as quickly as possible, so speed to power is their concern. And for some others, it might just be, well, I just want to ensure that I continue my energy journey. I've already said I want to electrify. I want to, you know, invest in automation. Can you make that happen? I need power quality. You know, I just don't want my system to essentially glitch every time there's a momentary on the system. So we have to think about the customer from that perspective, and it guides our investments. But I will say this, the point you just made now is a critical one around issues becoming more complex. There's been so many codependent variables as we try to solve this. The investments you make needs to have the right market response. The market response needs to be shaped by the right policies, and the policies essentially will be shaped potentially by essentially the political climate in some instances. And then ultimately you get down to the fundamental value of it, which is how does the customer perceive value and pay for it. So as you weave all of this together, you try to essentially pick a path of least resistance. Hopefully you're driving in the same direction as your ultimate goal, which is why for us at Exelon, we've tried to lay out, okay, we have a 10-year view. The pace at which we invest might change based on where we are, but our North Stars are our North Stars, and we want to make sure we do so in partnership with our jurisdictions and for the benefit of our customers. But you're absolutely spot on.
So I love it, Sonny, that you teed me up for the next question about partnerships.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier. So there's been a lot of talk at this event about the last mile, what it's going to take to get that last bit, whether it's 15% or it's a mile. And there's a lot of talk about partnerships that utilities are going to need to form to make that happen, and non-traditional partnerships, like things we just haven't thought of before. And so I'm wondering if both of you can weigh in on maybe some non-traditional partners that some of our folks here in the audience might want to consider thinking about to partner with to go that last mile. Because the last mile is the hardest, right?
Yes.
If you've ever run a half marathon very poorly like me, you know that that's when you're going to die, like at the end.
Well, I'll go on that because my perspective, again, is going to be a bit different. So I think this is a good mix, Sonny. Our largest customer base are governments, city, county, state, federal, all around the world. And I think this is becoming an issue where utilities need to be able to coordinate and share data and plan with their neighboring utilities, but also with their regional communities and their government bodies. There has been a lot of money out there. There has been a lot of goals that have been established. And I think when it comes to leadership, the most important thing is communication. And I think anything we can do to grease the skids of communication between the utility, between the regulators, the various stakeholders, the government agencies, the state, might be in multiple states. Anything we can do to improve that communication is going to help the overall process.
Yeah, I come at it from a utility lens. I think for us, the non-traditional partnerships would take in different forms. Now, obviously, you want to address any knowledge gaps that you have, so you find a way to deal with suppliers and or institutions that have the knowledge that you lack. For us, we've always partnered with like either academia or like the national labs. And most recently, we've tried to turn a lot of our vendor relationships to strategic partnerships where you're not just telling us what you have, you're telling us where you think the future is going and how can we co-create something. So to us, those relationships are what will get you there. But I will put it out there that just by virtue of where we are in, the energy landscape right now, this push for demand, the need for quicker supply response, I see a scenario where there could be really innovative partnerships where customers actually become more co-owners of the grid with the utilities. And by customers, I mean any end user. It could be someone who has self-supply in their home. It could be someone who's a large user and wants to essentially have better control of their energy usage. And folks who can actually help address supply chain bottlenecks and work with us as we navigate like this need to respond quicker to the energy landscape. So I see that as beyond just acquiring technology and understanding where we can serve differently. There are other people who can make alternate forms of investments in the grid as we know it today that could actually be beneficial for the entire community. And those innovative relationships are ones that we should be exploring.
The video we saw around lunchtime today, I thought it did an excellent job of just communicating what I've observed in my career. This idea that utility personnel look out the window at that system and they think, those are my poles.
Yeah.
Right? Those are my customers. That's why Christmas Eve, when the phone rings, a lineman will go in and go to work. And I think we've got to think about those customers as partners in that journey.
Correct.
Right? As an engineer, there's a lot of things. Somebody mentioned capacitors yesterday, right? There's a lot of things on our system that we set it and we forget it. We put a 50 amp fuse in. We set the capacitor for this. We set the relay for that. And we're moving to a world where we're going to have to be much more automated, much more data driven, but the customers don't want that kind of complexity in their life, right? The customer needs to get to a set it and forget it place where they're saying, I'm willing to participate on a hot day this much. I'm willing to give up this much battery in my EV. I'm willing to do these things. And then they set it. And they forget about it. I'm in the air conditioning cycling program. I only think about it once a year. And it just goes. And I think we're going to have to embrace the customer as a partner to get that last bit. It's going to have to be all hands on deck, is it not?
It does. And it has to be one where there's a clear value for both sides. What the customer wants and what the grid needs, sort of like how you have to find that, in quote, sweet spot that everybody has to, come out benefiting from it. And I do think that, the point around data is such an very important one. A lot of organizations are spending time trying to understand how they can overlay more creative intelligence over the pools of data that they have. We can't, most of the conversation here has been about artificial intelligence. Since the proliferation of Gen AI, everyone has been talking about what can we do differently with data. For us, it was always a discussion around run, crawl, walk, run, right? So establishing good data governance, understanding the risk around data, building the right data architecture, making sure that there's fidelity of your data pool, and then ultimately using that for the benefit of the grid, the customer, and also for us, very regulated industry, making the right advocacy for your regulatory returns is something that is critical. that data journey needs to start with the right partners. There are a lot of partners here who can actually help you with, a lot of the innovation around the grid, the physical infrastructure, the hardware, varies very little. The intelligence on the grid is usually on the software piece of it, and the real question is how do you partner with the right folks and making sure that you're doing things the right way. I know this has taken a slightly different turn from where you want to go, so
I appreciate different turns. I like to keep things. I actually have a personal question for you.
Yeah.
How many, on average, emails, Sunny, do you receive a day, on average?
Wow. Realistically, about 1,100.
1,100. Anybody in the room receive more than 1,100? By show of hands. Anyone?
1,100.
1,100. So the question is, for folks in the audience who are like, Sunny, I can partner with you.
Yeah.
And they send you an email, and you're like, I got 1,100 emails today. I'm sorry, I can't even get through this. How can somebody who's here who wants to partner, and this is a question for you as well, because you obviously have to be able to reach utilities. How does somebody demonstrate that to you, right?
Yeah.
They could be a good partner for you. I mean, I know I asked you this earlier, and he
Yeah.
said this is a really hard one when you get 1,100 emails.
I don't know if I have a good answer to that, but I will tell you this. When the emails come through, I have what should technically be a good sorting system. There are some that is like knowledge-based. They should go straight to certain folders, and I will take my time to read it, like research reports. There's some that are internally generated emails that I know from like work I have to do. There's some that's like more, so from the different categories, I can tell you I prioritize certain names, I prioritize certain activities, and I try to get through as many as I can. If someone's trying to connect with me, it has to be based on a mutual understanding of what the needs are. I ran into someone here and they said, oh, we've sent you about 4 emails and we still haven't gotten a response. But the truth is, I do think that most times when the inbound comes, it's usually from someone trying to say, here's what I have, without asking me what I need. And it makes it a real bit difficult for me to connect on that level. I do enjoy the connections that we make here, and I do enjoy hearing a different perspective. And usually from a verbal conversation, you can pick it up electronically. But if it's an electronic mail that has like a blanket, response, chances are that it will probably be looked at on a weekend, and we'll make a snap decision on that. So may not be the right answer, but that's kind of how I try to make sense of the craziness in my world.
I always think the honest answer is the right answer, unless, well, there's some examples, but we won't go into it. How about you, Pat? So how have you shown that you could be a good partner to utilities?
Okay, I was going to talk about email, but
Let's talk about email. I mean,
well, I was going to say I probably get 100 emails a day. Wow. But the more entertaining question is, how many unread emails do you have in your inbox? Unread emails do you have? Uh-oh, you're disappointing me. I try to stay on top of them using techniques like you described, right? Sort them and so forth, and I try to stay on top of it. When it comes to partnerships, our company services a lot of different industries, and utilities happens to be the second biggest industry. But we don't build the ultimate solutions for utilities, right? We rely on a lot of business partners. So I'm going to take it in that direction. Big names that you've heard of, like Schneider Electric and others, are business partners of ours. And I always find this a very beneficial part of groups like this, because I always meet a couple people, and there are several in the room that I didn't know from our business partner network. And somebody from LinkedIn always chases me down and says, Pat, I've been meaning to talk to you. And we talk about potentially becoming a business partner at that point.
yeah, I think that those are really good answers. So we're at about, I'm really watching the time carefully because I know that we're standing between you and perhaps drinks. So we've got one final really exciting question, but before we get to that, I wanted to ask everybody in the audience if you've got your cell phone, I know you do because I can see you, and pick up your phone and think about the values that you are going to hold on to regardless of what changes in your business, and send it to a couple people you love, maybe your mom, maybe your sister, maybe a best friend, and just write what that value is for you or what those values are for you, and just say, I'll explain later. And it's a commitment. that you're making, that you're going to stay true to yourself and your values no matter what happens. So I really appreciate that we started the conversation with getting to know both of you better that way. So the final question. I feel like we're on a game show. So when you think about leadership skills, leadership, and we talk about this all the time at Utility 2030, it's changing. What it takes, command and control doesn't work anymore. You mentioned being a servant leader. I love servant leadership. When we think about the fact that things are just going to continue to change, and we have to keep long-term and short-term and all of that in perspective, if there's people in the room who are like, listen, I don't want to be innovated out of a job, or I want to be sunny when I grow up, like what kind of emerging leadership skills do you think people should really work on developing?
Well, I was at a conference 2 years ago, and sometimes you go to somebody's booth and they have a little game there to try to get you to go into their booth. Well, this particular game was vote for which of these 5 things do you think is most important in leadership? And you couldn't see until you voted. And I voted for communication, and it turned out to be the leading one. But I think that as important as communication is, it doesn't mean much unless you have a very clear vision. You hold yourself and your organization to a very high standard. And then you can communicate that clearly, right? You started to talk about AI. A lot of people think, AI is going to take my job. I don't think it will. I think AI is likely to help us all work better. But if you are not using AI, somebody who is might take your job.
I think that's a great answer.
I was going with communication, so you took it right out of my mouth. So I'll go with the next for me, which is passion. I think you have to be very passionate about what you do. And, if you are passionate and disciplined, I think it sort of like helps, complement your ability to communicate. I always say it like for folks in my team, I said, when you come in, the baseline is you're smart. The next question is, can you take various forms of data, organize it, and make it make sense? That's step one. If you can do that and you're great at it, we know that. Now, can you supervise someone doing that? Can you make someone do that? That's step two. If you can do that, you make more progress. Can you anticipate what those issues are? And can you essentially begin to find ways to plug that? If you can do that, that's step three. Now, if you can do all 3 in multiple silos across a broader platform, that's step 4. So as you begin to think about your leadership skills, it's usually along those lines. The foundations are always the same. Ability to think, organize, make yourself clearly understood. And then after that, can you motivate others to do that? And then can you help them do that? And can you use your voice in a manner that actually gives them a better platform to do so? Those are the levels of leadership that you should aspire to. And if you're building a career, don't miss out on the foundations. A lot of people want to get out and be more like, I'm a spokesperson, I've got a voice, I got to say, yes, you do, but are your foundations right? Be good at the fundamentals. And then those other things are going to take care of itself. Foundationally, logical thinking and communication is foundational. Everything else sort of builds up on that.
Yeah, and I think mine is authenticity. I think that people can tell when we're fake. I think that both of you are very authentic, and I'm so grateful that we had this conversation today. Oh, we're at time. I was going to see if somebody had a magic question. If somebody does, we can break the rules here. Does anybody want to ask something really quick? Nope. Okay. Thank you so much. Everybody enjoy the rest of your evening.